So I'll let Zara introduce herself, and that's it.
Thank you, Homa. Yeah, great. Thanks so much for organizing this. And I really appreciate that we're all coming together from different parts of the world to make this happen. So a bit about myself. I'm currently based in Sweden, from Australia, and I am an ex-Muslim activist. A lot of my work has been around supporting, specifically in the area of honor crimes when it comes to ex-Muslims from around the globe, mostly targeted towards women, and working towards providing them with mental health therapy. And that's been an increasing ongoing issue that we've encountered, especially now that we have a lot of young women coming out and face a lot of persecution around the world, not only in the Middle East, but also in the West from their families, being ostracized by their families. And that's a little bit about myself.
Niklas?
Shall I take in English or Swedish?
Yeah, you can present yourself now in English. Maybe it's better.
Okay, my name is Niklas Kellerman. I am an ethnologist, and I am interested in cultural issues, how the cultural norms and values are going together or not going together with the cultural values contra human rights. And I was working for 20 years, kind of field work. I was orientated to the male role model, the problematic with the masculinities. Why is it that 95% of all physical violence is committed by men, even if most of men are, of course, not violent? But I will talk about it later. My introduction is that I belong to the Network Against Honor-Related Violence. I am on the board, and we try to influence the policy of the government, which is totally unsuccessful when it comes to honor-related violence because of reason of cultural relativism and the fear of Islamophobia. But I will talk it about later on.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Mahin Alipur. I have worked since 93 in Sweden with the refugee, child and women's rights. Now I'm in charge of a women's rights association, and it has become a part of my life. And I think because we have discussed how we can start to speak, and I start to speak in Swedish, of course, and I have sent the speech to Homa in Persian, and she has promised to translate it in English. It's very good. Thank you for that. And I have written my speech on the paper in Swedish. And I want to thank you, Homa, for this important seminar and the day, really. It's very important. And thank you, her and the other that help her. I begin with my speech. Stigande sekularismen utmanar islamismen. Den politiska islamens definition måste tas upp först. Detta uppstår när religionen islam vinner en politisk makt. Detta är samma fenomen som hände i Iran 1979 och nu i Afghanistan. Naturligtvis med hjälp av utländska länder, inte folk i Iran. Med sin islam tog Khomeini den politiska makten och berövade den pågående folkliga revolutionen i Iran. Civila lagar påverkades och många minoriteter, särskilt kvinnor, berövades sina grundläggande rättigheter, såsom rätten att klä sig fritt och att skilja sig, samt hundratals andra rättigheter. Enligt lag blev kvinnor till hälften människor och tillhörde männen i sin familj. Regimen i Iran på olika sätt, antingen genom dess verkställande och straffrättsliga befogenheter eller genom att bygga en kvinnofientliga kultur har försökt implementera dessa lagar i 4 decennier. Tillsammans med förtryck och fastställandet av andra klassens medborgarskapsstatus till kvinnor berövades männen också av många rättigheter. Dessutom uppkomsten av en dålig ekonomi i Iran som är en särdrag för politisk islam nedtrycktes samt sparkades ner yttrandefrihet och olika politiska och sociala aktiviteter blev avstängda. Alla fick låtsas vara muslimer. De grundläggande mänskliga rättigheter som är grunden för sekularismen och en nödvändighet för ett sunt samhälle har försvunnit från Iran. Saknaden av dessa grundläggande rättigheter, vilka är nödvändiga för människor som vatten, mat, luft, har skapat en sjuk, deprimerad och ohälsosam situation för människor i Iran. Även barn är förtryckta. Ett barn föds alltid fritt och att kunna få dessa grundläggande rättigheter är framför allt avgörande för hans eller hennes sunda utveckling. Även från barndomen berövades barnen dessa rättigheter och försöker staten att skapa en könsapartheid mellan dem från tidiga ålder. Det mänskliga samhället och livsmiljön begränsas av många röda linjer i synnerhet för kvinnor. Alla som passerar dem bestraffas hårt. Avrättningar och bestraffningar av kvinnor som har protesterat mot dessa frihetsberövande regler är en vardag i samhället. Fängelserna är fulla av frihetsälskande människor. Den islamiska patriarkala kulturen sätter männen mot kvinnor och utfärdar en licens för våld. Den härskande politiska islam är kvinnofientlig, våldsskapare och våldsvänlig. Den patriarkala kulturen med stöd av islamiska lagar i Iran visar sitt fulla och sin mordansikte dagligen i form av hedersmord. Eller att få kvinnor och unga, även barn, i misströstande läge begå självmord eller självbränning. Dessa tragedier har blivit vanligare i samhället. Den islamiska staten normaliserar vålden i synnerhet mot kvinnor genom sina lagar. Mördaren får hedersmedaljen efter mordet. Mördarna betraktas som en barnamus eller mannen med heder. Den mest reaktionära och våldsamma typen av kvinnofientliga stater kan man se i Iran och nu i Afghanistan. Jag gav den här bilden för att veta hur denna politiska islam spikade sina spikar i Iran och vad som har hänt mot folket i Iran hittills. Men vad hände istället? Vilken typ av försvarsmekanism och protest mot alla dessa orättvisor uppstod i samhället? Hur förändrades människornas intellektuella livsstil och kultur? Politiska islamen försökte under 4 decennier genom att avrätta, arrestera, undertrycka folk och censurera och därigenom genomdriva och normalisera sina egna lagar. Men de misslyckades totalt i sitt försök att normalisera ett islamiskt samhälle i Iran. Den utlöste en kraftfull mekanism omedvetet gentemot alla dessa orättvisor mot folket. Hur började sekularismen att växa? Att vara sekulär innebär att ha de grundläggande rättigheterna till ett hälsosamt samhälle och fritt liv. Som mat, luft och resten av andra naturliga behov. Att få välja fri kärlek, fritt uttryck, fritt val i varje aspekt av livet. Det är en nödvändighet och en grundpelare i sekularismen. Folk i Iran berövades dessa. Sekularism med dess två principer. Det ena som är separation av religion från politik och lag, och den andra medborgarnas jämlikhet inför lagen, saknades jättemärkbart av någonsin i iranska samhället. Det var här som förtryckta folket blev den drivande kraften bakom detta fenomen. Det vill säga sekularismen. Ett fenomen som syftar till att uppnå och återuppliva de berövade rättigheterna för folket. Detta fenomen visar sig i form av dagliga fackliga protester, utbredda protester mot politisk islam för att välja sitt eget livsstil gentemot de islamiska modellerna. Omfattande protester från kvinnor mot påtvingat hijab, mot hederskultur och hedersmord. Protester mot berövandet av rättigheterna för olika delar av samhället på grund av genus och etniska minoriteter. Protester mot islamiska straffmetoder. Även protester anordnas av folk för försvar av jordens rättigheter och miljö. Och för försvar av yttrandefrihet. Människor håller på att bygga sin kultur i opposition till den här islamiska kulturen. Bihijabi, med tolkningen dålig klädsel, som betraktas som ett brott i Iran. Vita äktenskap, icke-registrerade partnerskap, höjning av äktenskapsålder, låg barnafödande, högre utbildning framförallt mellan kvinnor, exempel på kvinnornas vilja att engagera sig i samhället, typ familjeärenden och sysselsättning. Hon är på närvarande på plattformen för alla sociala rörelser i Iran. Finns ett klausuler som kräver separation av religionen från staten och utbildning och jämställdhet mellan män och kvinnor. Folk ropar efter den. Konsekvenserna av handlingar och stil för att styra landet av denna stat öppnar upp omedvetet vägen för sekularisering av kultur och av det nya moderna sociala beteendet hos människorna i Iran. Dessa indikerar etablering av en stark sekulär rörelse mot politisk islam i Iran, där kvinnor inte bara är aktiva, utan att de ligger i framkant av den här rörelsen och har en ledande roll. Människor i Iran kommer att visa prästerskapet och politiska islamers verkliga ansikten för hela världen. Processen för sekularism av samhället går snabbt framåt och många tror att det är mer som en renässans. Denna renässans kan överskrida sin geografi och påverka regionen effektivt. Den som har blivit piskad och förtryckt av politisk islam, inte bara törstiga efter sekularismen som ett naturligt och livsnödvändigt behov, men också envisar att visa världen den politiska islamens verkliga ansikte. I slutet, det är viktigt att säga att de där sekulära rörelserna behöver internationella stöd och samarbete för att kunna vinna. Folk och stater i hela världen ska lägga under kulturrelativismen och tro på det att människor är lika. Och de vill leva en värdig liv oavsett sina geografiska eller andra tillhörigheter. Länge lever kampen för sekularismen. Tack för mig.
Thank you.
Tamam.
The translation of this speech is going to be on website. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now it's Zara's tur. Det är Zara's tur att prata. Now it's your speech, Zara.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, are you going to translate it to English then?
Yes, we are going to translate it, but she sent me a link last night, so I'm going to translate it and put it on the website.
Then does it make sense for me and Nicholas to speak in English instead?
No, that's okay, because you're speaking English. Translation of her Farsi.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
so-
can do that. Yeah, that's okay. She can understand English and you can
Okay.
understand.
perfect.
She just
Yeah.
wanted to focus on certain points. So that's why she's written it in the language
Yes.
she's most comfortable.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, well, I just hope that nobody expects me to speak Swedish because
No, I can understand English little. It's good. It's yeah, speak that.
perfect. Okay, great. Yeah. Well, I didn't quite understand your speech, but I was really interested in Nicholas's work around honor culture, and especially emphasizing the point on how changing government systems in the West happen to be quite difficult in terms of when it comes to women from Muslim backgrounds. I've worked with numerous refugees and women around the Middle East who are now in secular countries, but also ones who've held dual citizenships, for instance, British citizens who've been taken away from the UK to Somalia, for instance, for potential forced marriage, or a lot of other activities where a secular country wouldn't necessarily allow. The one biggest gap that we've found is that some systems have not been designed to protect minors as well, and in fact have caused further harms by their silence. And I just wanted to talk about how I think, given the recent events in Afghanistan, we've had such a major step back, given that, you know, we've come so far in other countries, but the lack of international awareness and intervention to the level to how it's affected a lot of women and girls there being sold for economic benefits and survival as well. It seems like the issue is always limited to selling your girls off instead of like other family members. Not that I condone that act anyway. And I think that there's very little attention given to such issues. But, you know, focusing on the West itself, I've worked with a couple of Swedish cases where, especially being an ex-Muslim, comes at a higher cost. While the law is there to protect you, possibly physically, a lot of the abuse with honor victims happens at a psychological level years before physical abuse ever happens. And that's the area that we try to focus and mitigate from, to help women to help pick up these signals in advance and help free them of a lot of the torment that they're facing in their own households. And this is a crime that happens every day. I think the one thing that we lack on an international level, or like especially with a lot of the liberal left, and only a proportion of it, is the word Islamophobia that prevents us from making any changes or discussing about these things, because so often we're labeled and categorized as hateful people when we're merely talking about bad behavior or toxic ideas that technically exist in many organized religion where women are considered to be inferior than men. But, you know, as an ex-Muslim myself, I've received a lot of attacks and a lot of attempts at being silenced to talk about these things, even more so-called unnecessarily provocative. And this also counters the issue on free speech and how women are constantly made to stay silent, even if it's stories about their own. And I think if you haven't known about me, one of the, not too long ago, about a year ago, I was arrested in Tanzania for exactly the same thing, being an ex-Muslim, but specifically a woman. Talking about it, the threats that came up to me, even in a secular country that should have been safe for me to visit, my own home country in Tanzania, I was arrested there. And there were no law preventing that injustice from happening, which I think, you know, Sweden is a bit better in that there's no manipulation of the law in that regards, especially when it gets to that. But we've had so many cases around the world where women are neglected or are so often slut shamed. A recent case that I worked on is with a Syrian woman who fled to Turkey and has been, by the Syrian consulate, has been denied any support, or has been in return being blamed for being immoral only because she doesn't wear a hijab, for instance, or the fact that she had a partner at her previous location, and the whole thing turns around to blame women for any act of dissent or any act of defying patriarchal rules. And I think, Nicholas, you mentioned something about 95% of the people who commit honor crimes happen to be men, but we know that most men are not violent. I think according to my research, the one thing I did also find is, especially where women in the honor abuse areas happen to be victims and the perpetrators of crimes in many cases, especially when it comes to abusing their own daughters. There are women who do play a part in it, especially mothers, where mothers are blamed for the action of their daughters and are abused even more. So they act as abusers and victims at the same time. And when it comes to rape cases and pregnancy after a rape incident, it's usually mothers who force the girls to get an abortion. And then it kind of goes further to abuse the girl, if not kill them in this case. So I'd be really interested to hear from Nicholas in terms of how his work specifically in the context of Sweden applies. I personally haven't encountered, I think most people are rational to talk to as compared to the US and even more so the UK. I think the secular world here is just slightly better as compared to other places. But I am really keen to hear what your views are on Sweden specifically in your experience, because as I continue to broaden the charity that I run, which is Australian-based but globally and continues to be in Sweden, I found a lot of neglect on the threats that I have personally got from, the tax agency, for instance, and how they're dismissive of that, like that even existing, and that I have to constantly prove that, that this is real, or there is sufficient evidence to show that I am or can be a protected minority. But I can pass this over to you, because I think this would be more interactive if we had a bit more of a discussion around this.
Exactly. I have one question. Have you realized that since the right wing increased in various countries, especially after the Islamic regime of Iran came to power, you realize that more honor killing is happening in Europe and in North America, while before either it was not as much as what we hear today and we are experiencing, but it was much less, or probably because we didn't have social media, we were not aware of. But I realized that the most right wing comes to power, the more women get the hit the most. Honor killing happens, isolation happens, disowning happens, and also committing suicide is happening between women a lot, especially youth. And more shelters are getting full of youth that are escaping the traditional laws and regulations that family are imposing on them. And also, I realized that the only way out of this situation is to challenge right wing and push them aside. And also what we are doing right now, because the people who escape, even though they may not self-identify themselves as total separation of religion into their private life, but they are aware of that, and that's why they escape the family and they're at the shelter. So I'd like to know your experience about this in Sweden.
Yeah, I think traditionally people don't associate Islamism as a right-wing ideology as such as they would other forms of political right-wing ideology. And that's where I think we can come in and kind of make that alignment in how much they have in common and why they should be held at the same level of scrutiny when it comes to harm done to minorities, be it minorities within Islam, not ex-Muslims as such, but it could be progressive and moderate Muslims as well. And to your point, in terms of people who haven't completely disassociated with the religion, I think one of the key challenges I find when working with refugee cases is that, especially with immigration around Europe, is that the people that do leave religion and are from the LGBT background when migrating to a safer country in Europe are often placed in the same group of people, which includes other Muslims that they're running away from, which even further violates other safeguarding rules. And it's kind of like going from the pan into the fire when it comes to their safety. And I don't think a lot of European countries have that in mind when they have immigration open, but have no systems to protect other minorities who are from a minority as well. And I think there is specifically a reluctance to approach assimilation and integration in this context because it's known to be very offensive. And from my very little experience being in Sweden, they don't like encountering difficult issues or talking about it at the very least. I feel like a lot of people would rather not talk about it and ignore it and move on than actually counter it and face it. But yeah, that has been my experience so far. I can speak for Australia mostly, and I know the same thing happens with Utterly Failed when it comes to immigration, with having Christmas Island and the other detention camps when it comes to refugees and migration.
Yeah, I realized that I should not continue this and give the floor to others to talk about this issue. But I realized that certain laws and regulations somehow has been adopted by all Western countries as well as North America, such as cultural relativism. And that again is segregating different ethnicities and building walls around us. So it's hard to penetrate and gain the solidarity. And the other one is multiculturalism, and the recent one is Islamophobia. I think what we need to do to challenge these three in whole West as well as North America to achieve to somehow push them aside. It would be easier on us to somehow come out and moderate the immigration and bring reform in immigration, reform in the life of women who are challenging the family because of what they are facing, but also to support them directly. So let's discuss about this later on after everyone is
Yeah,
speak,
it's
and hopefully,
important.
yeah. Okay, next.
Maybe
next.
Niklas wants to begin. Yes, good, Niklas.
You mute?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, now.
Now you can hear me. Okay. I can just directly connect to both to Mahin and Sarah. Sarah said that about this figure of 95% of violence is committed by men. That is a general picture. It's a very big picture. Honor-related crimes, it's a very small picture. It is only, in quotation mark, only 5,000 honor killing cases in the world per year, according to 10 times more. but it's nothing to compare to the millions that are committed by millions of the victims of that are going on. So honor crimes is a very specific, culturally specific kind of crime, that it is in the general picture violent, that it doesn't mean it's not important. I think it's very, 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 very much important part, but still the proportion is different. And to Mahin about, to the speech of Mahin, about religion and the secular societies in the West, how they respect and do not dare to address the religious issues. I have followed up this question since 1992. Really shocking how secular governments, and in specifically Sweden, the first feminist, openly feminist government in the world, how they bow and how they let religions actually rule and overrule human rights. I don't mean Swedish specific cultural values, I mean human rights. The simplest question like female priests or the preaching of ethics of chastity or hate against homosexuality. It is just open and it is just going on every day, and the government doesn't dare to say anything addressing to those religious communities who are doing it. So I have followed up this through my fieldwork within the Save the Children, and I have hundreds of seminars with closed immigrants groups on the suburbs, with male groups that we, together with my two comrades, visited and tried to initiate dialogues about gender equality and the father's role in the education of boys, and the cultural violence, how the boys get influenced by the cultural violence, which is not only the media, but also in the education in many countries where boys are raised in the military tradition. In Sweden, we have the tradition of peace in peace education in general in school, but in many countries in the world, and I think the bigger part of the world, like now it's going on in Russia, boys are educated in the culture of violence, and if you want to be a man, if you want to grow up a man, you have to learn how to solve conflicts by violence and not without violence. So our starting point was also the peace researchers, the famous Norwegian peace researchers' basic ideal, Johan Galtung, who is an old researcher and scientist, who stated that boys are educated to be conflict analphabets. So to be a man, there is always a threat to be a conflict analphabet. So the modern male role was the discussion, the basic of the discussion. And I just want to say, to illustrate this, how this is working, the segregation in Sweden, in these segregated communities, it is tragic. I should mention an example from the field work, that we were in an organization, actually people from a group from Africa, and they have been here in Sweden 5-10 years, and they didn't speak the language, so we spoke here through the translator. And when it comes to the Swedish gender equality ideas, they were very hostile and very much opposed it, because traditions are they experience as a threat, the Swedish gender equality policy. So they said that it is absolutely impossible that our girls would be prostitutes like the Swedish girls, and they would have relations before marriage. And they asked my comrade that, how is it possible that you are a young Swedish man? How is it possible that, do you think that you want to marry somebody who is virgin or not a virgin? It is obvious that your coming wife, it should be virgin. It is not so. And they were totally surprised when my young comrades answered, no, I don't want to have a virgin. It's a problematic to have a virgin. So then they turned to me, and because I was older and I'm an immigrant myself, so they, what would you do if your daughter is 18 years old and is coming home with a boyfriend? So I said, I happen to have an 18 years old daughter, and when she came home with a boyfriend and introduced me to her boyfriend, I invited them for dinner. So it was a shock for those people. It was a shock for those people. They have never met a single one Swedish man before during these 5-10 years that they have spent in Sweden. And they have never met an opinion like this. So they were totally confused. So this is the Swedish integration policy in a nutshell. Total segregation and probably mutual contempt. One keeps to the original religion and culture, the cultural values, or the values of the ethics of chastity, and looks down on the Swedish or the Western European values that allows women free relations. And from the Swedish side or from the Western side, it is a complete isolation. So according to these kind of experiences, we try to influence the politician. We try to influence the government and demand changes. That this kind of organizations, in the first place, the Islamic or the Muslim religious organization and the Syrian Orthodox religious organization, they would not be free to preach this kind of ethics of chastity, but they should have a dialogue with the government and not have subsidies, not have money from the government. It was a very big debate. For many years, I worked together with a very, very well-known girl here in Sweden, Fadime Shahindal, who was killed by her father. And our suggestion and our proposal, she asked always when we had a discussion also in the parliament, why do we have to propose self-evident things? Why do we have to propose obvious things? So I said to her, I cannot answer, you have to ask it our politicians. But she was killed. After that, we had a big debate about honor killings and honor crimes, and the opinions were divided, also not among the people, among politicians in the first place. Some people think it is the same gender-based violence as all the kind of gender-based violence, like the man kills his wife, or commit rapes, and others like us, we see the cultural roots and the religious roots in the ethics of chastity. So there was continuous debate, and it is never ending, and is still today never ending. Although today the government is not cultural relativist anymore, but they are continuing the same policy. On the one hand, they are helping those organizations who are fighting honor crimes. On the other hand, they are still continuing subsidize and promote money and subsidy to those organizations who are creating the culture of honor and creating the culture of anti-secularism and anti-gender equality policies. So to conclude, it has, of course, very, very serious consequences. Firstly, even if the government's putting a lot of money in order to prevent honor crimes, the amount of those girls who are influenced or who are under oppression of honor-related values are increasing. In this little country, we have more than 100,000 girls, according to the official government statistic. According to some researcher, we have more than 200,000. And we have no idea about how many girls or how many families they are openly opposing the gender equality policy, and they think that the culture of chastity is just a brilliant and it's a morally correct values. And the other consequence is that those families who are isolating themselves, they have a very, very hard problem, because their children, especially girls, they are in the middle of two different cultures, the culture of chastity or culture of honor. Free possibility to decide what you do with your body. So in that sense, there are lots of immigrant families that are falling apart. And the next conflict is, and the next consequence is that these conflicts between the two cultures, it is resulting in a very, very harsh and tragic conflicts within the ethnic communities. So the reformists are fighting the traditionalists, and on the opposite, the traditionalists are fighting the reformists. So when we have some seminars, sometimes we must have a lot of bodyguards and guards in order to defend free speech by weapon. And of course, the culture of also is a kind of basic for growing up the jihadist and the Islamist movements. So now we have also this, and consequently we have an increased anti-immigrant population and anti-immigrant party in the parliament, which was not in the parliament 10 years before. So the situation is getting worse and worse, and the government is not able to handle it. And admittedly, they are not succeeding. So the point is that we have, from the network of honor-related violence, we would like to have that somebody in this international context would be fantastic, reminding the Me Too campaign, the global Me Too campaign, to have a Me Too campaign against honor-related violence, against FGM, against the control of chastity, and against child marriage. A Me Too campaign worldwide. So I would like to give this ball to you if you can start this campaign internationally.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
There are a few things that I would like to ask as well. I realize that you talk about segregation legally and integration, which is not happening, even though the country law and regulation in Sweden and in England and in Australia is integration by law, but they adopted, as I said, cultural relativism, and that put segregation in place. I believe that in Sweden, legally, they got rid of cultural relativism. When we say legally they got rid of, it means that in law, they have no cultural relativism, but in reality, they do, because they're funding churches, mosques, and jihadis, anyone who wants to run any kind of cultural, let's say seminars or group or even charity, they get funded by the government. So in reality, by law, there is no cultural relativism. There is no notion of cultural relativism. In Canada, we have multiculturalism, which is worse than the culture of relativism. But in reality, on the floor, we do have it, because we can see the government supporting and flirting with Islamic countries or Islamic government. But what can we do? The focus on all activists. I can see the growth of secularism, the growth of leadership within the women, running various organizations, fighting against it. I can see that, and I can see the growth so much is increasing day by day. The reality is Zehra is here. Most probably she wasn't among us 20 years ago. Mahin is here. I'm sure that she was among us because she experienced the Islamic regime of Iran 20 years ago. But the reality is we have to adopt two avenues. One avenue is for public education. So in here, we decided, all women's rights activists, we decided to have cultural bridges. The cultural bridges is not individual service, it's educational. So we run groups and we hire, we bring experts such as lawyers to talk about law in Canada. We bring such as family lawyers to let them know about the family law in Canada, or educator from, let's say, ministries. So they talk about that, and we bring these discussions so they would be familiar with actually law. So one would be public education. Public education individually is beneficial, but reality is it takes 100 years. Public education needs to be enforced, and enforce means paying people to attend. So if we are running public education by the government, funded by the government, and government pays people through social welfare to say that one of the way we can pay you is to attend this public education, and they are forced to come because they are paid, and as a result they get educated, they get to know about the law and regulation. But the other one is the lobby, and the lobby needs to be done by us, by all the activists. And because the MPs, they have no connections with what's happening in the floor, what's happening among immigration. Even if they do, they have to play ignorance, because otherwise they're not part of that party. They'll be kicked out of the party. Look at Ayaan Hirsi Ali, what happened? She was kicked out. She was even pushed to give up her citizenship in Netherlands. So even if they are aware of the situation, what's happening in the floor, they would not open their mouth. So they want us to do it. I know that for the fact so many MPs, they invite me to the parliament and they want me to talk what they're thinking. They have discussion with me and they're hoping that I would speak because I'm in their side. I would speak what their mind is, and the same direction as their mind is. So, excuse me. So it's important for us to be to lobby with the government and change so many laws and reforms. And I'm so happy that we are here. We can have discussion. Your idea of running a campaign, whatever the name is, it's very important. And I'm sure one of us would pick up this campaign. Among us, we are thousands. In fact, we are millions of activists across the world. One of us or several of us can join this campaign and make it successful. But this is what we need to do. I can see the dirty side of what government is doing, but also I can see the floor. I can see people that they are challenging this backward culture, and they're coming forward for total separation of religion into their personal life. That's important. They may not care about government.
Huma, I think you should unite in this campaign. A campaign, a Me Too campaign against honor crimes, it would be fantastic. But united. All these wonderful organizations that you have together, and together with also with some famous people, of course, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Yeah. But I want to say something, Huma, you know, I try to speak in English, you know, the country is very different. For example, Sweden is very different from the other countries. Niklas, maybe I and the other people, they know I'm working here from since 1993. And in that time, I couldn't believe that the women, they don't have this, the equality here. But it happened many arranged marriages, the girls disappeared after the 9th grade, you know, to 9th grade, it was the people, the community had responsible for the children. After that, it was, you know, something they wanted. And then the honor killing too. But it has changed, Niklas, now too, the rules too, about the honor killing. If it happens somewhere, the police and the government and the people that want to know who did that. They search about many people, not one people, but it took many times to tell them the honor killing is something that is managing by the many people. Now yet virgin issue is important in Sweden, and the people want to control their girls. But I want to say that the Sweden is one country, maybe in the whole Europe, a country that give many money to the religious parts, like mosque, like schools. We have Islamic school here. We have Islamic not a school. It's under a school, and they give many money to them. Culture relativism is very, very strong here. We have very, very bad integration policy. All those that have made the girls, I think the women and the girls know their rights, know very nice about their rights. But the traditions, the religion, the family is so strong, and they can't move. They must, give up. It's just a pity, they can't do anything. But the rules has changed, but it goes very, very slow. And it's something that we must work hard here. And I think the Sweden is very bad example for the women in the whole Europe.
It goes so slow that I said it takes 500 years before this equality.
Yeah.
But let's Sarah say something, because we have 2 minutes left, or 5 minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add with, I think the important distinguisher is that while women's rights are at some degrees respected in a lot of Europe, I think when it comes to rights of other minorities, the same rules don't apply, because the excuse is it's their culture. And that's exactly what's troubling, is that I think the fail of a lot of the West is not recognizing that women from my background deserve those rights, and that there shouldn't be different standards for what rights are given to different women. And I think tapping into integration and assimilation, yes, that's absolutely been a horror show where I think people are from the same backgrounds are kept in one location, and the crimes happen and nobody is made aware of. And one of the factors is that I think women, from the way I was raised, you never really talk about it. What happens in the house stays in the house. And that's an idea that has been constantly leaving, especially young girls, to feel guilty about. So, familial abuse or even just sexual assault within the family happens, but we're slut shamed to a point that we're not meant to talk about it, because if we do, then it's our lives that are ruined. And there isn't enough support that happens with a lot of social services in perhaps Sweden, but I think even in Australia, in the UK, there weren't people who understood what those signs were for women who are about to be forcefully married into different in different countries or taken abroad for marriage. And there wasn't a coordinated, and there still isn't a coordinated response to how people counter such behavior when it affects young women, especially, but not limited to. And I think convincing the government, I've tried convincing the Australian MPs in terms of humanitarian visas and opening that up to people who are not activists but still face persecution or abuse for being who they are, for removing the hijab, or many other cases, to open those visas up and recognize that there is abuse beyond that. And I think specifically with being ex-Muslim, you don't actually have those spaces. You'll have the Baha'i faith in Iran, Coptic Christians in Egypt, but none of them exist for non-religious people. And I realized I am out of time. So before Mariam and Humaya let me
to finish it. May I add one thing, that the basic problem, according to me, that the government is speaking very nicely about human rights. We're speaking very, very nicely about feminism, when the practice is the opposite. They are
Yes,
giving
yeah.
priority to religious and cultural rights. And that is the practice.
Yeah.
And it is impossible to move on, get over this and start to talk one thing and do another thing. That's
Yes,
the
yes.
tragic.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
true. Mm.
So good luck to this. I hope
Yeah.
that you
Thank
will have
you.
this Me Too
Thank
against
you.
honor crimes.
Yeah, thank
So
you,
we will
Homa.
let
Thank
you
you,
know.
the
Thanks,
other.
everyone. Thank you for
Thank
being
you,
here.
Yusuf, and the
much.
other of the team.